Welcome to a new episode of XR and AI Spotlight, the show where we give the stage to creative technologies founders and entrepreneurs who are pushing the boundaries of XR and AI. My name is Gabriele Romagnoli, I'm your host, and today I'm here with Tejas Kulkarni. He holds a PhD in computer science and artificial intelligence at MIT. He has worked on large AI systems at Google DeepMind, and he is now the CEO of Common Sense Machine, an AI platform that turns images, video, or even sketches into game engine ready 3D assets. Listen to this episode to learn what are AI hallucinations.
Creativity is very deeply tied to hallucinations. Most of the hallucinations that the AI generates are actually, some of them are actually quite implausible. There is good hallucination, which is
What is the best modality to obtain 3D models generated by AI?
it depends on how fast and how much controllability you want. You want something to be generated quickly, then probably a text, and then just visualizing the image and then saying, okay, I want 3D model for this. The most controllable way is
How 3D generative AI models are going to evolve and specialize.
yeah, I think there will be like quite a few verticals, and even within verticals, I think there might be some multiple kind of categorizations within that, and within each category, there might actually be like a few competitors.
And how the future of 3D Gen AI is going to move into world building.
I think that's where it will start. I'm excited about kind of full entire kind of mini world, a mini game world creation. Soon you're going to actually see many of our assets are going to be rigged, and you're going to also be able to like.
But before we get into it, I want to thank our sponsor Cognitive 3D who made this episode possible. Cognitive 3D is a spatial analytic platform to improve how organizations can analyze user behavior in VR and AR and turn the findings into actionable insights. Cognitive 3D has a handy SDK that integrates easily in Unity and Unreal. Data are collected and displayed in 3D contextually to help you improve user engagement and retention. Whether you are designing training and simulation, running consumer research, or creating games and entertainment content, Cognitive 3D will change the way you track and learn from your data. Head to cognitive3d.com to learn more. And now, let's roll the title and welcome Tejas on stage. Hi, Tejas. It's really great to have you here with us.
Thank you so much for inviting me. Very excited about this chat.
Absolutely. And look, I want to start diving right in. And the question that everybody's asking is, how far are we from using AI-generated 3D models for production work?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So 3D turned out to be actually the hardest modality. So if you look at basically the first thing that came with generative models is text with the GPT variants of models. Then I think we saw images come. We're beginning to see like videos, and I think 3D kind of is like the final frontier because, and I think one of the reasons is because 3D is actually the hardest problem because you have everything mixed in it, right? If you take actually a production ready workflow, let's say you're talking about any AA game or a AAA game, everything has to come together. You have to have the asset in place. You need to have dynamics. You need to have rigging. You need to have physics between objects interacting with other objects, and then more and more built on top of that. So I think it depends on what you mean by production readiness. But I think at the lowest level of the 3D creation process, which is to get a textured, let's say, a polygonal mesh as a starting point, I think that's where we'll first see an impact with generative models. And I think 2024 might be the year where we will start seeing in like indie and AA level workflows, where actually, if you want to create 3D blockouts, I think already the technology is good enough for prototyping. But I think, for production readiness, I think the big jump that has to happen is the geometry and the topology to be at a point where an artist can say, okay, I don't have to rewire a lot of the polygons and the textures in the UV maps. I can actually start from where the AI leaves off versus using it as a tracing, as a tracing paper, and then just kind of drawing on top of it. So I think this it will happen this year, given the kind of progress we have seen in the last year and the year after. Really, a lot of this started in 2023. I think there's a long history of scanning, like almost
Yeah,
10-15 years of history of scanning. But really, if you look at like 3D generative models from sparse inputs, like text and images, I think it's only 2023 where we saw some really interesting and monumental results in the field, and also at some of the work we did. So I'm hoping that this year, I think we'll cross that chasm.
absolutely. And I mean, me being always looking for some of these tools and experimenting, the moment I found it, I find Cube. That is actually the tool that you guys have created, right?
Yeah,
I was like, okay, I can actually use this. I started giving some spaceships or some alien figures, and the performance is better with certain types of models, right? For example, character, it does pretty good,
yeah,
and with sculpture and with anyway some anything that is kind of like symmetric, it behaves
yeah,
pretty well. The moment that symmetry breaks and you are trying to make something different, then things gets a bit tricky. At least when I tried it now, things have improved dramatically.
yeah.
And so what you are saying is also that the major obstacle to make these assets production ready will be topology and the UV mapping, so that
Yeah.
people can immediately use this work for their production.
Yes. Yes. And I think there are two things you said there, right? I mean, I think I'll take them in sequence. Maybe one thing you said is like, even for the places where it fails, right? How do we kind of make it work better? So I think there are a lot of prop classes where we don't see straight edges, we don't see hard edges,
Mhm.
we don't see good accuracy on certain object categories. So that's one place of improvement. And the other place is, even if we do see that in some classes, like characters, for example, then you still want the geometry to be like have nice quad flows, have nice line flows, and all those type of aesthetics and also design abstractions that any process, any artist would kind of say that, yeah, okay, I can actually go from there. So on the first front, I think if you look at the origination of a lot of the approaches, I think there are two types of approaches in the field. I would say traditionally, I think most of 3D creation was actually like either manual or procedural, right? So a procedural or parametric and procedural. So in the parametric procedural line of thinking, I think you basically can do certain class of objects quite well, and they look really well. Like trees, for example, they're like really good procedural generators for trees
Yeah.
now. Or like maybe for like some of these face models, it started with Thomas Wetter's work with basal face model, and then also Michael Black's work from Germany, who did SMPL and other parametric body models. So if you have a very certain class of objects that you're interested in, then I think the graphics and the computer vision community actually have some very good solutions for those. But then that's very class specific. I think it's very useful and impressive, and those methods will keep being very very used actually in like certain narrow domains of the 3D creation process. But a lot of it is actually new, right? Like when you're creating a game, it's designed to be fundamentally new. So in those instances, actually, a lot of the failures that you see happen because once you start looking at the whole distribution of all of objects, you need a very general purpose learning based method that can handle that. And I think the dominant method that came 4 years ago, people started doing supervised learning. So they were like trying to take ShapeNet and PartNet and some other supervised data from the internet, and they were trying to train neural networks that tried to regress. And it
Mhm.
kind of actually that was very important for progress, but it didn't really capture the distribution because it you can capture chairs, but then what about all the other things that come about in a game, like spaceships and flowers and mushrooms and trees. And so in that case, actually, these models didn't really generalize. So after the supervised approaches, then people started looking at these text to image models. And there, I think, the text to image models had a much larger prior, So it learned about everything, like stable diffusion, mid journey, but in a 2D space. So I think this paper, dream from Google, from Ben Poole and others, I think it basically was trying to essentially look at these very general kind of text to image priors and then distill that into a nerf, right? So a lot of the work in the last 1 or 2 years was taking the priors out of these text to image models and then feeding them into nerf like representations. And there I think it those are computationally heavy models, and I think they ended up working quite well, and they do actually end up delivering quite a bit now. But they still have a lot of limitations. Like they have the generality, but they only give you like certain surface level outputs for certain object classes. But then they miss out on hard edges. They don't have the right topology. It doesn't really have a full 3D understanding of the object. And then
Mhm.
people are going back now to supervised learning also along with it. So there's almost like a going back to it because, and I think the reason for that is because there weren't really good 3D neural nets that could even just memorize large data sets across the board. And I think now that we have transformers and nerves, I think there are some very good architectures. So I think those three kind of advances is what is now making it possible to fix some of those issues that you're talking about, and then a layer on top of these models that really carefully handles the topology and the geometry is what is going to take it to the artist level outputs.
Mhm.
So
And we have
that's
talked about and we have talked about geometry, right? The other things that's and especially for the non-technicals, right, that stands out is the textures of this model,
yeah.
so the way it looks, and often based on, for example, an image. I've seen that recently you've talked about that you have addressed this AI hallucination to some extent. So maybe you can explain people what are these hallucination and what have you done to prevent them.
Yeah, that's a very good question. So one very important design choice we made, and I think this was actually to ground the problem to text and image to 3D, because if you just go from text to 3D, the issue is that if I say a chair, it's like what chair? Like a
Mhm.
text is a very impoverished representation of the world. Actually, it's very powerful because it's very abstract, and I think that's the power of it. But it's not enough to actually denote the concept in your head, right? And that's one of the main reasons why concept artists use the medium for them is actually an image and text, right? So we kind of made that choice, hard choice actually, for early on in our exploration. And you see there's a lot of research communities working on image to 3D now also, like image plus text to 3D. And I think that is the right that is the right grounding. Now that choice kind of reduces the hallucination to some degree from design, I guess, because now you have to respect not just the text but also the image. But fundamentally, these models actually they use a lot of priors from all over the world, right? And when you are actually using these general priors from the image video domains, what ends up happening is that your model is probabilistic, which means that if I am showing your face,
Mhm.
and it's you ask the model what the back of the face is going to be, it's going to give you like 100 different haircuts, right? Maybe here ponytail, maybe not for me, but so I think all those kind of variations of those answers are actually important, because if your model is not probabilistic, then it's going to be stuck in giving you one answer, and it's going to have a very hard time optimizing. So the hallucination power of these generative models is actually a feature. But now the question is, how do you make sure that the hallucination doesn't kind of become a problem, which is what ends up happening in these models.
So,
So
but before, so can you define maybe like, because you're talking right now that hallucination is a feature, but from a just like definition standpoint, what is an hallucination generated
what
by AI?
Yeah, I think that's a good. So most of the hallucinations that the AI generates are actually, some of them are actually quite implausible. So there's a problem termed as the Janus problem or the Brahma problem, where you have like multiple heads and multiple kind of if you have a face here, there'll also be a face here, and all these things. So, and I think a lot of progress is now happening there. But I think you'll have one type of hallucination where you introduce things that you shouldn't be introducing, like faces and textures and saturations, right? So that is the bad hallucination. But then there is good hallucination, which is I want to know that how does the back of my head look like. So that's really the good hallucination, and I think good hallucination is at the root of what human imagination is all about, right? So when I'm imagining something, I'm
And
actually
you make
hallucinating.
me sorry to interrupt, because I just want
Yeah,
to say this. I was actually creating one of the first pieces that I made um, with the app was like a totem, and I gave an image of a totem. And when I look back, when I got the 3D model, the back of the totem was almost better than the front. So that is like the kind of like creativity that you would expect from. It's not just completing the model as you would expect, but just giving its own take. And that's indeed part of the creative aspect that you also want to keep and retain from an AI model.
I think that's precisely right. I think the 3D creativity in this domain actually is a good word, and I think that creativity is very deeply tied to hallucinations. Like you could argue that the best artists take hallucinogenics or something. I don't know, but if you do too much of it, right, or if you go let your imagination run too wild, then it's just kind of weird, and you can't really make sense out of it. So there's a Goldilocks region where if you have the optimal amount of hallucination, then you get good generalization. And a lot of what we are working on actually is the latest model, for example, was trying to steer the system in a way such that the knobs in the system actually have the right dials in. So one way we can tune them is by just looking at a lot of data that users have generated, and then tweaking our hyperparameters such that for most of them, the hallucinations look reasonable to human beings, right? To our testers. So that's how we started with. I think now where we are transitioning to is like let actually users actually play with these systems, and then they can do thumbs up, thumbs down, and then
Right.
actually using some of that kind of feedback data, right? Then you can actually do some of these indirect measurements to then and then use them to feedback into the system. So that's something that we are working on at the moment. So there are these different ways that we can use feedback signals to then reduce the hallucinations of these models.
Understood. Understood. One thing that you also mentioned is about the input system, right? And you mentioned that you made a deliberate decision of pushing towards images and leaving and have text as supportive in a sense, but not having text as the primary input method. Now, in a moment where this system are becoming more and more multimodal, and when Cube actually can use different input, because it can use images, it can use video, some other can use text. You have also now allow people to create a sort of a sketch that can turn into a 3D model. What do you think is the best input for obtaining 3D models with AI?
Yeah, that's a good question. Actually, it depends on like how fast and how much controllability you want. So, for example, if you want like a lot, you want something to be generated quickly, then probably a text, and then just visualizing the image, and then saying, okay, I want 3D model for this. That's probably the fastest way, right?
Mhm.
And that's also fastest way to like if you wanted to automatically convert the web, the internet data into like 3D models or something, right? Because it's the least human kind of oriented way. The most controllable way, if you want to have control over your creative process, is sketching, right? Sketching and text, where you actually draw contours and basically the basic abstract. All humans actually start off drawing and doodling on paper. That's how we learned. I have a 3.5-year-old daughter who loves to draw. I think she loves painting and drawing and tracing on these kind of cartoon abstractions. And I think that's pretty much how our brains have evolved to perceive the world, more or less. And that's how we learn hand-eye coordination about abstract concepts. So I think that's the most controllable medium that we will have. And it's no surprise that I think professional artists end up using that, because as children, I think that's how we've learned how to kind of parse the world and rebuild it. So there is a gradation between those two extremes.
Okay, and I because I personally always find that inputting just an image, for example, it's another powerful way, because also you do get those, you get to infer also how this is going to look like, how is this going to be textured, and sometimes it's not that easy in a way to control that with a sketch, but probably it also depends for who is this, right? So you brought up an interesting point, and that was depends on the control you want to have, but maybe depends also of who you are.
That's true.
Are you a professional 3D artist, or are you a creative making something for a quick AR app? So probably it also depends very much where you stay in your creative process.
And one thing that we have done is like no matter what modality you have, so let's say whether you have sketch modality or whether you have text modality as input, we always ground it to an image first.
I just wanted to have a quick break to remind you that the recording of these episodes and many more great conversation with incredible experts are available on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. Just head over to my profile or the episode description, open up the link in bio, and pick your platform of choice. And now, let's get back to the show.
So that it's easy to visualize, because even as you're sketching, actually one of the things that you keep seeing in our interfaces, you actually see the RGB image first, which in real time, and then if the moment you like it, you basically turn that into 3D. So that way, actually, all those kind of, it's almost kind of intuitive, right? Like when, as a person, if you're sketching, you as you're sketching, you also imagine how it's going to look like. You almost have like a photorealistic imagination
Mhm.
of that in your
Right,
head.
right.
So that the same thing in your head is being displayed there, right? And so that way, actually, you get to see all the intermediate representations. And I think it's important to show that visual medium, because that's where most of the concepts, like you said, like texture is a very high level semantic concept that you can't really describe with words so accurately. Like, look at some of the mid journey prompts, right? They're like paragraphs, and it's really difficult to make sense out of them. It's just kind of like very hard. Even after like a year of prompting, I have no idea what any of it means. So it's quite challenging, I think. So, but when you look at an image, you immediately understand it.
And what I also find interesting is that the sketching is still supported by a text element that is in between, right? That is interpreting that sketch. So at the end, you're still inputting like a multimodal, both text and the
Yeah.
sketches, something that results in a preview image that then it's turned into a 3D model. And if this sounds maybe a bit crazy for people that are listening, you should go there and try it, because it's really crazy. Like, and I think it it is a completely different way of approaching the creative process from the get-go. And personally, what also I find interesting in how these methods are going to help people, um, others, to be creative, right? And unlock this opportunity for more than just the 3D artists that want to obtain a specific look of a character for a game or for an NPC that is in the game. And instead, like, what if anybody can start creating 3D models like the one that you can make in Cube? And this is actually what makes it, what excites me the most, to be honest. On one side, you mentioned about your own interfaces of the app. It's a web app, right? So how much effort goes into making that also easy to use for the user, and how do you approach that?
A lot. I mean, actually, we our product team is like looking at every pixel. I think they are actually like, the moment uh, we actually had a real product team, which was kind of the middle of 2023. I think we started having like, all the interfaces that we had now, because primarily I come from a AI research background. Most of our team was like AI research, right? A bunch of researchers. So we really want. I mean, we were not UX focused in the same way before that. So I think a lot goes into it now, and I think it's we definitely have like this like UX first thinking now, is like, if you look at, and it stems from the core belief that if you look at Blender right now, and if you wanted to create any of the models, even a donut in Blender, for me, it still takes like a lot of time, like to create anything, because
I
it's
cannot but agree.
and I think that is the state of, and that's one of the main reasons why 3D is where it is now, because it's very challenging to create it, and I think there's not many people who actually have the skill set. So I think we started off from that belief, and that actually immediately tells you that the UX question is actually the main question, and that's the big innovation that is happening, is we are redefining how those tools are done now. And I think, you could clump all those tools as like extremely useful, but let's think of those as almost like, pre kind of deep learning era tools that will still have a very important role to play. But I think they will almost be like this co-pilot, or this kind of an agent like interface, where you'll speak with it, you'll throw some images at it, and you'll communicate with it through some easy methods that most people can, and then that is where your creation begins. And then you might actually go and import that into some of the more heftier tools, right? If you have the skill sets, or directly go to the engine. So that interface actually requires us to rethink the UX, because that's really what we are trying to do here, is reimagine the UX component of this.
And I have to say that I'm a big fan of ways of UX. Is something that I always try to look at when using a tool, because I find it so important. And also something that, regardless of the feature functionality, sometimes is really what determines the success of a specific
Yeah.
tool, right?
Yeah.
I was curious, since you mentioned it, what are some of the things from a UX side that I think you learned or implemented that had a positive impact on how users are actually using the tool?
I think uh, actually a big one that we saw was, like when we first launched Cube, we launched it on Discord, and we actually got most of our traction through Discord. And but still, I think actually the Cube wasn't really designed for Discord, if you look at it, right? Because Cube is not fast like Midjourney. It wasn't actually, for sure, to begin with. But still, I think there wasn't anything like it. So people were very excited and interested, and there's a huge community, and they got us started. And I think we are maybe now approaching a version of Cube that's going to be more Discord ready, because it's going to be extremely fast. But back then, actually, we started with Discord, but then we actually, after like a month or two, we then had a web version. And then the moment we designed the web version, we actually saw like something like 95% of our traffic started becoming web oriented, just because how we ended up kind of designed the web interface. Because people don't really, I think for text prompts it's easier, and when you have like a fast kind of input output interface, Discord is an easy medium. But when you have to look around and do a few things to, in a 3D interface world, I think it's important to kind of have some native 3D UI elements in it. So, like just switching from Discord to web actually was like a massive gain that we saw. And that was like, that was kind of like a moment where we were like, okay, yeah, I think, it's clear to us that, that's gonna be our main, that's gonna, like, Discord is gonna be our top of the funnel community, and then web is where the usage will happen the most. I think now that might change, because we have a new model that's like close to real time. So maybe Discord might actually supersede the web. Let's see. I don't know. So I'll probably know this in a few weeks' time. So I'll let you know how that goes.
And actually, since you're talking about speed and weeks, so I mean, AI is moving really at neck breaking speed, right? So how do you keep up with this rapidly evolving landscape?
Yeah. So there's one answer to this. I actually I've been through like many deep learning waves, like computer vision, and then deep reinforcement learning. I actually enjoy this kind of like there's a time when everything is ignored. Like, I mean, 3D was ignored like a year and a half ago or so, right? Like it wasn't really in
In the
the
picture.
vocabulary. Yeah,
Right.
it wasn't really in the vocabulary of things, and now it's kind of heated up. So I actually enjoy this kind of like, if you're in an empty land, then it's very depressing. When a lot of progress is happening, I actually feel alive a little bit. So this is kind of like our sweet spot as a team. We actually love this kind of momentum. I think some people. I think if you're too concerned about kind of competition and other people, and you don't think of if you don't think of them as your extended research team, I think it'll be very stressful. So we just think of the whole community as our extended research team. That's really how we operate, and I think learn from it, and it's better actually if things move much faster. The second thing is not everything that comes out is actually good. So you take a paper, right, and you implement it, and you realize that, oh, okay, it's when a field is moving at the speed that it is moving, actually, not there are very few things that end up mattering, but the rate of improvements that happen are actually not as frequent as it seems like. So a paper might come out that seems like it's really good because the results will be cherry picked. Then you start implementing it, and then you realize that, okay, on this massive test set, I think you really, I mean, it really doesn't really work well, but it works well on these other things. So I think you start seeing a lot more noise. So the signal to noise ratio gets affected quite a bit. So I think the best thing you can do is set up strong evals. And the strong evals are very important, and we are quite focused on that, so that every time a new idea comes, you actually know where it actually stands. If it is very good, I think we are like, we adapt it quickly, and then move forward. In terms of keeping up, I think, since we have been doing this, we have a pretty good head start. So I think any new idea that comes in, maybe within a week or so, we have implemented it. And the other thing is, I think, we're also we are now more focused also on like training bigger models. So that means that we have to have uh, large GPU clusters, and that costs a lot of money, and it takes a lot of time to like do large training runs. And but there still will be like competition, but will be like fewer and fewer people, I think, as time goes on. So, and then the moment we go deeper and deeper into kind of workflows and partners and customer data, and I think that kind of thins the competitiveness even more. So. I think there's so there are like a kind of at multiple time scales and multiple dimensions of competition, but at a very wholesome level, I'm not too worried about competition yet. Maybe in 3 years, once 3D becomes like GPT-4, right, like a GPT market, I think, and when we are fighting for like a sales dollar, I think I'll be more competitive. Uh, right now,
There are a couple of things you said. First of all, maybe you and probably you and also other people. I also come from a scientific background. I also got my PhD in a very different topic, and I like your approach about, you say, I find competition as like extended research team. And that's the moment that's just like, right, that's how we look at other people that were doing the same things we were doing. They were kind of like all contributing in different ways to a common mission.
yeah,
So that is actually very interesting. And there is also another point that you bring, that you say, I am also not sure that there must be, I think, at some point, a degree of specialization.
yeah,
I don't think there's going to be one company, one product that is going to do all the 3D. I mean, it just doesn't make any sense. Uh, I don't know if it's going to be the types of model, the like categories, or styles, or I'm not sure exactly what that degree of specialization is going to be, but there must be, because like if there are dozens of 2D design tools, right, that go from Procreate to Photoshop to Figma. Now it's 2D
yeah.
design tool, obviously. There must be something also in 3D generative AI. I'm curious, do you see that? I mean, and if so, in what direction this specialization of these models is going to evolve, you think?
Yeah, I think there will be like quite a few verticals, and even within verticals, I think there might be some multiple kind of categorizations within that, and within each category there might actually be like a few competitors. So that's how I see all of this
Yeah.
pan out.
Yeah.
So for example, at the highest level, right? So you will have VFX. I think VFX is going to be affected. I think probably nerf like technologies are going to make a big impact there. There's industrial scanning world. I think that's probably going to be ripe for disruption. There is going to be like CAD world. I think that's a whole world by itself. There's going to be gaming. I think, like what we are talking about. There's going to be like robotic vision. I think that's going to be a big world. There's e-commerce, and I think each of these things is going to be quite specialized. And there will be some infrastructure layers that spans them, but there will be companies that maybe reuse those that have their own versions, and then go deeper inside each of these verticals. So I think that there will be kind of this verticalization, just because the go-to-market efforts are different. I think so. Unless you're an infrastructure layer, I think you probably the app layers that do end-to-end go-to-market will win versus the platforms. I think like the pure platforms, and I guess we are the pure platforms will obviously be like the cloud companies, right? And Nvidia, right? Who give you all the kind of oil, the basic machinery, and then I think the end-to-end apps that actually solve a problem is probably going to be the first set of winners, and then you might also start seeing infrastructure and platform players also emerge, which might take on like one or two of those areas, and then there might be some multiple players within those as well, just uh, uh, for customizations. And I think I do see like I do see for 3D, like you said, right? I mean, for some of the other domains, they're actually quite simpler, but 3D is a very complex tool chain. So to even just do games by itself is a massive undertaking, right? 3D has not, in an end-to-end way. I think you could argue that text and images are much further along. Maybe even videos would be sooner, because all you have to do is produce pixels or predict words. But when you do 3D, you have to do a lot of things, right? You have to do like the geometry, the UVs, the lighting, the rigging, the animation, the NPC characters, all of these things, right? So I think we'll see a lot of proliferation there, for sure.
Yes, and there is another point that we so far we kind of like focus on indeed a static 3D mesh, but the moment that you're talking about rigging and skinning and animating, that is another world where there are tools right now specifically focused just on those problems. So how are those all gonna kind of like, let's say, synergize, right, and work with each other and find their own niches? I think that's one of the very exciting part that we are all in for, right? And when we talk about this future, right, do you think, what do you envision the impact that Cube is going to have in the industry? And I mean, what are you actually the most excited about?
I think I'm really excited about the idea of like uh, if you're trying to create like a 3D world, a 3D game world. Um, right now, it feels like a nightmare to even get started. So if I personally could just like if I have an idea, I wanted to create like a small miniature version of GTA 6 or something, or I wanted to create like a few characters that have common sense. That's why we kind of named the company Common Sense Machines. It's like if I could just like imbue a few characters and a few objects in a small world, and create basically a dynamical game out of that, in a prototyping phase, just like how Midjourney and Stable Diffusion are very good for like first pass prototype. And if that can be done extremely rapidly, within maybe a few minutes, and then you start productionizing it, I think that's where it will start. I'm excited about kind of a full entire kind of mini world, a mini game world creation, and I think we are taking steps towards that. So right now, so far you have seen different modalities, including images, sketches, text, to 3D. Soon you're going to actually see many of our assets are going to be rigged, and you're going to also be able to like chat with them. They're going to chat back with you, and they're also going to move. So that's that. We're already kind of we already have some of those product features in our internal builds, that in testing. And I think maybe by the time this podcast comes out, I think we'll have the first first few, early versions of that released, and that's our kind of beginning point into having these characters and worlds have common sense, right? Where they're not just kind of like empty corpses of meshes; they actually have life inside of them,
You
and
know
that's
that
what
just this
most
is what
exciting.
this is exactly why I'm doing this. This is why really like I like to interview people to learn kind of like the story of the why behind the name of a company, then seeing
Yeah.
how that evolves into actually what is that we are gonna get. And I love it. So the idea is we are not here to make 3D models. We are here to create, to make sense out of the words we create, or to help people make sense of the words they create. And how does that turns? It turns into prop characters and what's behind them.
Yes, like there's a story behind it, there's a life behind it, right? And I think, but right now you need to be a Disney team or something, sub team, or like some indie game studio or something. But I think even today, like, we started with assets because without assets, nobody is going to create a compelling world, right? I mean, I actually grew up playing multi-user dungeon games, like text games, and I loved them. I mean, I spent like 10 hours a day just playing text games, and it was wonderful. And I think more people definitely should play them. But I think there's something about like creating a visually rich experience because it elicits a part of the brain that just fires up. And I think there starting with assets was just a starting point because now anyone can create them. They're not at AAA level yet, but we're going to try to push as hard as possible to keep getting there. But already they're like interesting. They're already kind of good enough. Where now, if we start giving life into them, and I think that's one of the main reasons the company was called Common Sense Machines. It's virtual machines with common sense. Is that we want to have these kind of assets have common sense in them. We want them to talk back to you. We want them to move and have goal-directed behaviors. So, and this is a very hard problem, I think, right now, right? Like you have these NPCs, but these NPCs still don't have goals. These NPCs have LLM brains, but then I guess before even we started having these 3D generative AI models, all the NPCs that exist, they have to be hand modeled and hand curated. And it's very hard to kind of just whip up a new NPC and just kind of give it life, right? So I think I hope that this company's definitely the company's end point, if you will, is like these virtual characters in virtual props and worlds, and real humans are like some of them are real humans. You may not know which ones are, and you are talking to it, and some of them are talking back to you, and there's this kind of society of agents in a virtual world, and talking to each other and moving around, and they have their own goals. And I think that's the kind of thing that we want to facilitate, and that is really the dream behind CSM. That's why people ask me sometimes actually what the name even means, and I hope that with the next release, I think we'll probably start showing some of the first flavors of what that means. But we haven't shown that yet. Yeah.
Fantastic. Tejas, I really wanted to thank you very much for being here, enlightening us, and sharing what was your journey, what you guys are building, and it's also what's coming. I'm be the first one in line. Let me know when it's out. I'm gonna be the first to try it. And indeed, I cannot just encourage everybody to just go to csm.ai. Am I correct?
Yeah.
That's the website,
Yeah.
and try it out because I think it's really like mind-blowing creative experience. So thank you very much, Tejas, for being here.
Thank you so much for your time, and it's always lovely to interact with you. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you really much for listening in. And remember to head to YouTube, Spotify, or Apple Podcasts and check out more insightful conversation revolving around XR and AI. And if you really like the show, please leave a review on Spotify and Apple Podcasts or a thumbs up on YouTube. It really helps me keep doing this and shine the spotlight on the latest and greatest advancement in XR and AI. Till next time.